You can find plenty of articles and videos online debating who would win, a European knight or a Japanese samurai. But you should approach such content with a good dose of skepticism. The outcome of any duel between fighters wielding melee weapons depends primarily on their level of training and skills. Only after that does the type of armor or weapon come into play. In most comparisons, the knight is shown wearing full plate armor. However, knights only started using full plate in the last couple of centuries of their existence. For most of their history, knights wore chainmail. Although the English word knight and the word samurai both have roots in the concept of serving, and these classes began forming around the same time between the 7th and 8th centuries, they are not equivalent. A knight is a more specific concept, while a samurai, depending on the period, could be anything from a European-style noble to a mercenary warrior. Thanks to Hollywood, the katana has become incredibly popular, often with almost mythical qualities. If you ask someone who's not familiar with historical weapons about the katana, you'll probably hear nothing but glowing praise. Japanese armor, however, doesn't enjoy the same universal admiration. Some will argue it's lightweight, well-designed, and flexible, while others will joke that the Japanese made their armor almost out of straw. Looking at samurai armor, it's genuinely hard to figure out what it's made of. Leather, fabric, laces, and a variety of colors make the armor look unique and somewhat mysterious, but in reality, it's simpler than it seems. Japanese armor is a typical example of lamellar armor made from steel plates bound together. We could debate the properties of steel made from iron sand or magnetite for ages, but it's enough to say that Japan had these resources, and they were used effectively. Lamellar, scale, and plate armor existed in Europe from the earliest civilizations, but after the fall of Rome it nearly vanished, replaced by chainmail. The production of plate armor in early medieval Europe persisted mainly in the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Europe returned to plate armor with the brigandine. In some ways, samurai in the 10th and 11th centuries were already using armor technology that would only become common in Europe centuries later. However, this was less due to Japanese innovation and more because they were close to ancient centers of civilization in China and Korea. The influx of settlers who became part of Japan's population brought various technologies, and trade wasn't insignificant either. But why does samurai armor look nothing like steel and appear so unique? The answer is quite simple. Japan's islands have a very humid climate. From ancient times, to preserve metal, leather, and wood items, they were coated with a special lacquer. This lacquer was made from the toxic sap of a local tree. By adding soot or certain minerals, they could give it different colors. Often, fabric or leather was glued on top of the lacquer, and these parts were also lacquered. The colors were not just for aesthetics. The color schemes functioned like European coats of arms, indicating family or clan affiliation. Generally, samurai armor before the 12th and 13th centuries was made of relatively large plates, around 3 inches tall and 1.5 inches wide. The plates were about 1 millimeter thick, but they were sometimes overlapped, increasing strength. Occasionally, leather plates were used, but these were less durable. Leather plates were often used as temporary patches during repairs. Silk and leather laces that tied the plates together would stretch over time. To fix this, the Japanese began using plates of different sizes with varying hole arrangements in the same armor. By the 13th century, some sets featured very large or very small plates. The classic samurai armor is the o-yoroi, popular in the 11th and 12th centuries. A quick glance at the features of this lamellar armor might raise doubts. It weighed up to 28 kilograms, which is heavier than many later European full-plate armors. Most of this weight rested on the shoulders, and the fighter had several vulnerable areas, particularly the arms. Bracers only started appearing in the 12th century and initially only on one arm. Even the later arm protection wasn't particularly robust. But hold on before drawing conclusions. Originally, the samurai was a mounted archer. The earliest samurai code, when translated directly, was called the Way of the Bow and Horse. This later evolved into the well-known Bushido, or the Way of the Warrior. Samurai families were even called families of the bow and arrow. While European knights focused on lances and close combat in Japan, the spear only became popular in the 15th century. The Japanese bow, known as the yumi, was truly massive, typically measuring over 2 meters in length. It was usually made from bamboo for both its string and back. The asymmetrical shoulders were likely more convenient for shooting while on horseback. Nomadic tribes used compact and powerful composite bows, but the Japanese avoided using horn and sinew due to certain religious beliefs. The use of bows by samurai is one reason why their arms were often unprotected or had minimal armor. Their shoulder guards were also unique. European archers generally didn't use shoulder protection. Japanese armor had a large shoulder guard called an osode, which moved back when the arms were raised, allowing for unimpeded archery. The mentioned o-yoroi was designed for heavy archers. When the samurai was mounted, the lower part of the armor rested on the saddle, relieving some of the shoulder weight. This armor wasn't particularly flexible, but provided enough freedom for bow use. The main purpose of this armor was to protect against arrows, which it did better than European chainmail. The lacing on Japanese armor wasn't easily damaged by arrows, though a few slashing blows could require expensive repairs. There were many types of samurai armor. They all used plates that formed either a vest-like cuirass or a wraparound garment called do-maru. Poorer samurai often wore simpler types like haramaki or hara-ate, the latter resembling an apron. By the late Middle Ages in Europe, the role of the bow declined. Samurai lamellar armor evolved, with some of its weight shifting to the hips, making it easier to wear on foot. However, the love for ranged weapons remained a key part of Japanese culture throughout medieval history. Because of this, samurai armor had several vulnerable areas, particularly in places targeted by slashing or piercing weapons like the tachi or later, the katana. Underarm areas, the inner part of the shoulder and forearm, often lacked protection. The collarbone, outer forearm, and shins were typically weakly armored. Swordplay became particularly popular in the 17th century during the Edo period, also known as the Era of Peace. Bored during peacetime, samurai began creating many schools of swordsmanship. Something similar was happening in Europe, where dueling fever took over. Overall, until the 14th century, samurai armor was at least as protective as European knight armor, if not better. However, it covered less of the body and had more weak points. This was the trade-off for a more versatile fighter who could excel in both ranged and melee combat. In modern gaming terms, it's like a penalty for being a multi-class character. Had the samurai focused solely on close combat and made fully enclosing armor, their arsenal might have included weapons resembling European designs. Although it's worth noting that samurai did have axes and some blunt weapons as well. Knights' full-plate armor offered superior protection with fewer vulnerable spots. But keep in mind, this gear was designed for a warrior specialized in close combat. By the 16th century, samurai began using armor made from large metal plates, known as yukinoshita-do, which can be classified as a type of Eastern mirror armor. Fun fact, if you strip away the leather, fabric, and lacquer from many types of Japanese armor, they lose much of their distinct look. When crafting lamellar armor, the Japanese started minimizing the use of lacing, eventually moving towards rivets, essentially creating something similar to European brigandine. Around this time, the most prestigious type of armor was the Nanban Gusoku, modeled after high-quality Spanish cuirasses, which were also covered in lacquer. At the same time, Japan developed its own versions of full-plate armor, though they typically covered less of the body. If we consider the entire period of existence for both samurai and knights, rather than comparing just one late medieval suit of armor, we can say that Japanese armor was on par with European armor in terms of durability. The smaller coverage area was offset by the versatility of the samurai, who could effectively engage in both ranged and melee combat.